Okay, great.
All right, cool. Technology worked. Okay, so I did want to give a brief introduction about why I thought it was appropriate to get Mr. Moore in today to speak with us. Number one, he has written a new book called Here Comes Trouble. Here Comes Trouble. Talks about his childhood in Davison, mentions his parents and family, his grandparents, some racial interactions, talks about his father and his father's political influence on him. I have a quote in your handout. His father's occupational background and how that may have influenced Mr. Moore's development into what he is today. Influence also on education through both his father, his mother, his grandparents, his friends, and his siblings. So talk about that. I also wanted to tell a very small story about myself, a little anecdote about why I think this is important for you to absorb here in an academic setting. When I was 9 years old, my grandma and grandpa brought home a VHS videotape, and we had to find somebody with a player. I think my uncle, who was an attorney, was the only one with the VHS back then. We popped in the tape because they were on it. We watched about 45 minutes of this video. Remember, I'm 9 years old. And there for 1.5 seconds is a newspaper clipping with my grandma and grandpa in it at a church shaking the hand of Pat Boone. I had no idea who that was. I watched the movie. And then it sat on our shelf, and so I had nothing better to do when I was 9 besides play baseball, basketball, and watch this movie. I watched it over and over. Well, that movie turned out to be Roger and Me. And as a 9-year-old, really absorbent sponge, you know, watching that material, I was in Lansing. It was about Flint and GM. There were GM factories in Lansing. It really had an impact on me, so much so that 23 years later, I'm a sociology professor, and I'm showing that video and other Michael Moore videos in my classes because they're very relevant. They hold relevance today. And when I was an undergrad at Western Michigan, my professor in I believe it was a religion class, showed Roger and Me, and so I got to relive that experience again. So the material that Mr. Moore presents is very sociological, whether it's his films or his new book. Because his new book was related so closely to family and influence and our local community, Davison and Flint, I thought, what better and what more exciting than having me lecture again to you, but to throw him up on this screen and see what he has to say. We'll get it firsthand. So without further ado, Michael Moore's new book, Here Comes Trouble, and so here comes Michael Moore.
Welcome, Blake. I'm in New York City today. I'm just curious. Now, no one in the class has read the book, right?
Not yet.
Bits and pieces.
Yeah, I read some.
Read a little bit, okay.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll give you a little bit about my background growing up in Flint and Davison, and then I'm really happy to open it up for questions sooner rather than later, even if that's what you'd like to do. My family, my mom's family, were amongst the early settlers in the Flint area. They settled in an area between Davison and Lapeer, near Alba, if you're familiar with that, or Lake Nipissing. And they came to Michigan from Pennsylvania in 1836, 1835, 1836. So my family has been in the Flint area for about 175 years. That and the fact that somehow my family, everybody seems to get married late and have kids late. So, for instance, my grandfather was born 3 years after the Civil War. That's just my grandfather. And as you know, the Civil War was in 1865. So when you have relatives that are that close to you, in other words, the stories haven't been passed through 8 or 9 generations. It's just was passed from my grandfather to my mom to me. grew up with a very rich sense of history and of place. My dad is from the east side of Flint. He went to St. Mary's High School, which is a closed down school over on Franklin, north of Davison Road. And he was on the state championship basketball team. They won the state championship in 1939 there at St. Mary's. And so he grew up on the east side of Flint, and they got married in 1950. He was in World War II. And they decided to move out to where my mom grew up, which is in Davison. And so I was born at St. Joseph's Hospital there, which is now gone, over on the east side of Flint there, off Robert T. Longway and Kersley, that area over there, which I think is now a parking lot for Mock College or something like that. And then I grew up in Davison. You guys are all familiar with Davison, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Anybody from Davison there?
I'm from Otisville, which is by Davison.
Yeah, Otisville counts.
And we got two people in the back row too, and one in the middle.
Okay. Well, I can't speak for much how Davison is these days, but when I grew up, around the time I was born, a lot of white people started moving out of Flint to Davison. So Davison, which was a little village, again, where my family had grew up and lived around since 1836, was now becoming one of the suburbs of Flint, and a place where frightened white people moved to. And so I grew up mostly around a lot of scared white people. And who had very negative attitudes about African Americans. And so a lot of my early memories are, sadly, of the racism and bigotry that I remember in the Davison area.
Michael, let me stop for 1 second
Yeah.
and just ask you, was any of the fear substantiated, or do you know where it originated from, the fear?
Well, that's a very good question, because it never makes any sense to me to be afraid of somebody else because of the color of their skin, or if they're wearing a hoodie. So I think definitely in the 1960s, when the riots took place in Detroit, that really, I think, created a huge influx of people who left Flint. And I think that they just, I mean, I asked my dad about this. I said, how was it, because there were a lot of African Americans in Flint when you were growing up in the 1920s and 30s. What was the situation like? And he said, well, it was all very separate. Even though we didn't live down south, and even though there wasn't legal segregation, there was segregation. So, for instance, there used to be a big auditorium near downtown Flint called the IMA Auditorium, which was torn down to build Auto World. And the actually it was made part of Auto World, and then it was torn down. And they would have large dances, big bands there on Saturday nights. And the way that it worked is that the white teenagers and white young adults would have their bands and their dance starting at 7 or 8 o'clock. And then they would have the place till midnight. And then at midnight, after African Americans would come in and use and have their bands and their dances. So it was kept very separate in those regards.
the one thing that wasn't that separate was the assembly lines in the GM factories. The United Auto Workers, the union, very early on fought against segregation and racism, and eventually insisted that African Americans not be segregated on the assembly line. Usually, black auto workers were given the worst jobs in the foundry, the most backbreaking, dirtiest jobs were given to African Americans. And the UAW changed that. And so, for the first time after the war, after World War II, my dad and his generation worked alongside African Americans on the assembly line. And of course, as can happen when you are around other people that you're not used to, you realize that they're human beings too, and some of the bigotry starts to fade away. But in 1967, the riots in Detroit, and I tell the story in my book where the family next door to us, the riots had started down in Detroit, and the family next door was loading up the station wagon and a lot of their possessions and guns, and they were going to head up north. In fact, other families in the neighborhood were doing the same thing. They were going to go up north because they were afraid that the riots might come to Flint, like it was some sort of contagion. And so they were running to get away because Davison wasn't far enough. I remember shortly after that time, a black family trying to buy a house in a subdivision called Bell Mead, which is on Davison Road, between State Road and Irish Road, out in Davison Township, and not being able to buy a house there. And so there were a number of pickets and demonstrators from Flint who came out to picket the neighborhood for not allowing a black family into the neighborhood. So that was sort of the time that I grew up in. I tell the story in the book of my mom taking us down to Washington, D.C. on a trip to teach us about government and all this on a summer vacation trip. And we went down to see Thomas Jefferson's house, Monticello, which is more outside of D.C., down in Virginia, which at that time was still part of the segregated South, but the laws had just changed in the United States to ban discrimination, and but some people hadn't caught on yet, and so we stopped at this gas station to go to the restroom, and there were two restrooms, one said whites and one said colors, and I don't know, I think I was maybe 10, 11 years old. I was really stunned and didn't understand really what that meant. And my mom was very upset that us kids had to see that. Because in Flint and in Davison, that kind of thing didn't happen, obviously. The sort of segregation and racism people tried to keep it tried to keep it subtle as much as possible. But that was really, I just have a very strong memory of that day, and my mom being very upset that her children had to see something like that in the United States of America. But growing up in Davison, I went to Davison High School. I graduated from there. High school was great. We had a lot of young teachers who were just out of college. So it was like 1968, 69, 70, and it was all during the 60s movement and the anti-war movement. And so a lot of these 22, 23-year-old teachers came to Davison to teach with their long hair and beards and whatever. And a lot of them really opened our eyes to things that we weren't exposed to in Davison. So I have a very good memory of high school and all of that. Other than the fact that as I got near to being a senior in high school, the Vietnam War was still going on, and I was afraid that we were going to, be drafted. And of course, I wasn't going to go to some crazy war that had nothing to do with the defense of the United States of America. And so my friends and I, we used to go to the anti-war rallies, which took place actually right where you're sitting. The building, you're in the main building, right, there on the campus?
Yeah, we're in French Hall. It is right in the middle, yeah.
Yeah.
Right on
So,
Kersley.
There's a small park there to your west called Wilson Park. It's a little park there. I think it's off First Street. But it was a much larger park then, and it covered the area that you guys are sitting in. And so all the anti-war demonstrations took place there in Wilson Park. And I'd come in from Davison to them, and I'd meet kids from Flint, and we started making our plans to how we were going to escape to Canada if they ever drafted us to go to Vietnam. So I tell a story in the book about going over to the Blue Water Bridge in Port Huron and trying to figure out how to sneak into Canada. It was also a time when abortion was illegal, and so if you got pregnant and you wanted to have an abortion, you weren't allowed to do that. And so I tell a story about that, about a friend in high school who got pregnant and went down to Detroit to get an illegal abortion from somebody who wasn't a doctor. And that story is a good way to. It's a good view of what life was like back when abortion was illegal. So I tell that story in the book. How am I doing here, John? Am I hitting on the things that you want me to talk about, or?
Yeah, and we do have some questions. Some students are going to come to the front. One thing I wanted to ask you, just to kind of maybe wrap up the race discussion, was I'm trying to pinpoint the variables that differentiate you from someone, and the story that's coming to mind right away is when Martin Luther King got shot, and there was some cheering, but you were saddened by that cheering. So the variables are everyone went to the same school, everyone went to the same church, but I think had different parents, and so that might have differentiated you from them. The one thing that I was trying to figure out why your parents are different than their parents when you all went to the same high school and grew up in the same town. I didn't know if maybe you had an idea of whether it was Irish or because your dad worked in the shop, if you thought the shop workers in general were less racist than the other families, maybe farm families in Davison.
That's a good question. Yeah, I do believe that actually, because the neighbor next door to us was not an auto worker, worked in a metal shop in Flint that was not union, and so I'm sure it was segregated, and so they didn't have that experience that my dad had of working next to assembly line workers of all races, creeds, and colors. Yeah, I do tell the story in the book of the night Martin Luther King was assassinated. I was at church in Davison. I was an altar boy, and after Mass, somebody in the parking lot shouted out, "They've killed King. Martin Luther King is dead." And a bunch of people coming out of church started cheering, and I was in 8th grade then. It was quite the shock. I think the parents have a lot to do with it. I think that my parents, while they were not raging liberals by any means, they were not hateful people, and they took their religion very seriously, which would prohibit them from hating somebody because of the color of their skin. And so I think they pretty much instilled that into us. Another factor that we had is that we had a cousin who lived in New York City, and her dad was a state representative from New York City. Called them state assemblymen, and he was a big Democrat and very much involved in the Roosevelt administration. And and was very liberal. And she would come to Davison. They'd drive out every summer to spend a month in Davison. And we were exposed to ideas from New York City at a very early age. And I think that that also had a lot to do with it. And then finally, the young teachers at Davison High School who came out of the colleges of the late 60s, and they were all full of peace and love and all of that stuff. And so they imparted a lot of that to those of us in class, and I think that went a long way. When I go back to my high school reunions now in Davison, it's really kind of a cool thing, because it's amazing how all the people I graduated with, for the most part, were pretty enlightened and fairly liberal and not racist, and they remain that way to this day. And it's kind of a cool thing to see. And I've often wondered, why that is, because we grew up in a different environment than that, but we rejected it as teenagers. And I'm sure, I talk about in the book, the introduction to black music that we had never really heard before, when Motown became big, and Motown being so close to Flint. You had all these black entertainers and black singers, and it exposed you as a child to African Americans, and in a very good way. And so I think that probably had a lot to do with the culture itself was changing. And I don't know if anybody watched Mad Men last night. Did anybody watch that show? You guys watch that, Mad Men?
No, they're not big Mad Men.
I don't have TV.
Oh, well, that would cause a problem.
It's a show. It's set in the 1960s, and the show begins with there's a demonstration, a small demonstration outside of a building of African Americans in New York City, and these advertising executives look out their window and they see all these blacks down below their building with picket signs, and they decide to dump the coffee in their coffee pot out the window on them, and to fill up bags with water and throw them down to try and drench them down below. That was I think the first scene of the show last night. I thought, wow, that really captures a lot of the racial attitudes at that time that were changing, and some people did not like the changes that were taking place.
Michael, I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
See if I can get in the camera here. My name is Danny Bledsoe, and you were talking about the concern that some people had that the riots would be contagious. And regardless of the particular riots in '67, but we do know, sociologically speaking, that riots have been very contagious in other times in history. This includes the reality of what we've seen in the last several months in the year to in the Arab countries, and the riots catching there. Now, whether anyone agrees with that they're good or bad that those are happening, or the motivation, we do know that they're contagious. Why? You said that it was kind of unfounded. I'm paraphrasing what you said, that it was unfounded that people were afraid of the contagious riots in '67. Why were their fears unfounded then, other than just looking back in history?
Oh, that's a very good question, because I think, first of all, here's the part of their fear that was not unfounded, that had legitimacy in reality, and that legitimacy was this: the reason why people in Davison were afraid and wanted to get in the car and drive up north to Houghton Lake or someplace like that. White people knew that African Americans did not have it very well, and that the game had been rigged from the start, to where African Americans have always been on the bottom rung of the economic ladder, and remained so to this day. And I think that white people instinctively knew that African Americans probably are pretty pissed off, and if they ever decided to take that anger and take it to violence, I think people were afraid because they knew that things had been set up for where the have-nots were black, and those have-nots in Flint may decide to head out to Davison and take some of the things from the haves. So I think that part actually, I can see where and why they would be afraid. But the riots themselves in Detroit had very little to do with politics. The riots started because these two African-American soldiers had just come home from Vietnam, and their friends were throwing a party for them at an after-hours club, and the police decided to raid the party to see if there was alcohol there after 2 a.m., and they came in very forcefully and started arresting people, and here all they were doing was welcoming home somebody who had gone to fight for the country, and now they were being abused by the police, and that's where the riots started with that. And so I think that's my take on it. I don't know if that helps at all. Or
it does, and with the permission of my classmates, they said I can ask you a follow-up question. Knowing your position on guns, we know that the roots of gun control is specifically to keep guns out of the hands of black slaves so that they can't revolt and so that they can't gain an edge and they have no opportunity to take an opportunity to stand up for their rights violently if required. That being the case, isn't being as part of the, let me rephrase that, regardless of the fact that you are a wealthy white male, you do support equality rights, and isn't supporting gun control taking those rights away from the poor and the oppressed to be able to revolt if required against the upper classes?
Yeah, I don't know. When you say my position on guns, I don't know if you've seen Bowling for Columbine, but the Bowling for Columbine is not a film that advocates for gun control. Actually, it's a film that says that guns aren't really the problem. The problem is us. The NRA used to have a saying, "Guns don't kill people; people kill people." But then I went to Canada and discovered that there are more guns in Canadian homes than there are in American homes per capita. 7 out of 10 Canadian homes have a gun in them. And in America, it's something like 5 out of 10 or 6 out of 10. So, but Canada has only a couple of hundred murders a year, and we have over 15,000. And so, they're 10% our size, but still, that should mean that they should have that would be 2,000 murders in this country if we were the same. So why don't Canadians kill each other? Why do we do that? And there's other countries that have a lot of guns, but they don't kill each other. They don't reach for the gun like we do. And so I wanted to explore why that is. What are we afraid of? Why do we have these guns, and then why do we use them when we get frightened? And in the movie, I basically say that I think race has a lot to do with that, because the majority of guns in America are not in the inner city; they're in the suburbs. And I, growing up in Davison, other than for hunting purposes, I never understood why anybody would have any other kind of gun, because I didn't understand what they were afraid of. So my position on guns is a little more complicated than that.
And I apologize, I did not see that film. I saw your interview with Larry King on the topic. So yeah. And I may have limited information based on that, but that's where it comes from.
Sure,
Thank you for answering my questions. We got a line of people asking him.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah. No. Go ahead. Okay.
Say your name too.
Okay. My name is Shelby Urey, and first of all, I just wanted to thank you for actually coming and talking to us. But to sort of go on a little bit of a tangent, sort of going back to your childhood, because we've talked a lot in this class about the American dream and the concept of that and everything, and I was just wondering if, growing up, if you were given any sort of concept of an American dream that you should aspire to, and also if you think that's something that's attainable for people, or if that's really an existing concept nowadays.
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, when I grew up, it was very clear that if you worked hard and the company prospered as a result of your hard work, you would prosper. So all of our dads, none of them had a college education, but were able to work in a factory that had a union, which meant that they got a good wage. We had health benefits. You know, family could be raised on one income. You could buy a house. You could buy 2 cars. You could buy a cabin up north. You could send the kids to college. All this on one income. And so I was raised with the belief that if you just go out and work hard, you can do well in this country. Clearly, that's not the case anymore, and I think that's really changed. And you know, I'm curious how that has affected your generation, because when I was sitting in those desks, when I went to Flint U of M, and I only went for a year and a half there, but you know, none of us had any question that we would have a really good job when we got out, that we wouldn't even have to look for one, because there were so many to be had, and it would pay really well. So you don't have that, and I've often thought about how you guys must feel that my generation, your parents' generation, the 60s and 70s generation, that we're going to change the world and we were going to make the world a better place and hand you this wonderful world. We've actually handed you a worse world with a lot of insecurity and anxiety, and not the American dream that's so easily attainable anymore.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was a good perspective. And pass it along.
Thanks for the introduction.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Teresa Woolard.
Hi, Teresa.
Hi. I'm back in college after 19 years, trying to figure out this computer thing that's going on nowadays. We don't use paper. We should have a lot more trees. Let me give you just a quick background. I grew up in Rankin, Michigan. My parents,
Rankin.
You got it. So basically a white neighborhood. As of now, I have 2 children. They're 11 and 13, both girls. We live in an interracial neighborhood on purpose because I would like to stay here and see Flint become a better community. I believe in Flint. And my children, they have never been taught that color makes any difference. People are people and love is love. Is kind of how I teach them. On that note, I would like to ask, for children who love grandparents and elderly people in their lives, what would you suggest as an explanation for them when their grandparents and such address them as they, as far as African Americans? What would you suggest?
Well, that's great that they use the word they.
Yeah.
When I grew up, there were other words that were being used. That's a very good question. How do you explain to your kids the way that it was and the attitudes that the older generation grew up with? I think that you just have to explain, like I've explained to you, that it was a very, very different time, and America has a very kind of sad history when it comes to race. And you know, we've tried to make it better. We've tried to correct it. We haven't been very good at it. We've gotten rid of the separate bathrooms and the separate drinking fountains and all that. But you know, Davison, Grand Blanc, Flushing remain pretty white, and the city of Flint remains pretty black. And so I mean, let me just say this. I think I have a lot of hope that the younger people that are sitting there in the classroom, they're not. From my going to college campuses or whatever, a lot of the racism has already dissipated. That I'm assuming most of the people in the room there do not have racist attitudes. I'm assuming most of the people in the room there believe that you should be able to marry the person you love, regardless of what gender that person is. So I think that one good thing that we've done, my generation as parents, is that we've raised you guys to be less hateful and less afraid. But now we have to correct the economic injustice that exists, because unless we fix that, the racial thing will never really be fixed in this country.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question.
My name is Tiana McNear. I like to add that I live in Davidson, Michigan. But I wanted to know, what was your intake on the Trayvon Martin story?
Well, my take on it is that the man who shot him should have been arrested. And I think it's a very sad situation that, you know, I think, you know, those, if you're an African American man in this country, you still have to walk and talk and be a certain way so that certain people are not afraid of you, or so that the cops don't stop you. And it's, I think the Trayvon Martin thing just shows us that we really still have some ways to go with this. It also shows, regarding guns, that they have a very stupid law in Florida. We have a version of it in Michigan, too, where you can shoot first and ask questions later. And that's really sick. So as much as I am upset that the man who killed him has not been arrested, I'm probably more upset at the National Rifle Association and the former governor, Jeb Bush, who passed this law, got this law passed, that allows people like George Zimmerman to just shoot somebody like he did Trayvon Martin.
Okay, well, thank
I mean, let me ask you this: Do you think a similar thing could happen in Davison that happened there in Florida? If a young black kid with a hoodie on at night was in a neighborhood, do you think it would be just as likely to happen in Davison as it did in Florida?
I mean, I don't think so, because, like you said, it used to be like really racist in Davidson. But, I mean, where I stay, it is like, I'll say 99% white people, and I probably make up the 1% black people. But they're real friendly and nice and welcoming, and they don't make me feel like they look at skin color if they do. And it's kind of crazy because they actually like give us more privileges. So it seems like they feel like they have to show us extra tender love and care or whatever.
Yeah, that was that way when I was when I went to Davison High School. There were like 5 or 6 black kids, and they were the most popular kids in the school. Everybody loved them. It's easy not to be afraid when you're only 1% of the population. I don't know what it would be like if Davison was 1/3 black. It might be different, but I think Davison has changed, though. I mean, I really think as the older generations die off and younger generations grow up, they grow up less racist, and so I think I think things are better. I noticed just the voting patterns in Davison. Davison usually votes for the Democrat who's running. That was not the case when I grew up. Davison always voted for the Republican. So I do think that demographic has changed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. City of Flags.
Hi, my name is Cheryl.
Hi, Cheryl.
Hi. Flint's been bad for quite some time, and your book, Roger and Me, for the first time ever, was for the first time ever, was the time that anybody was trying to do something about it, spoke up on behalf of Flint, and nationally and influentially, and you kind of became our spokesperson, our savior, or whatever. And I was just wondering what you are doing now, or what your plans are to keep helping Flint.
That's a good question. I made my first film, Roger and Me, because I was very worried about what was happening to Flint. At that point, we had in the 70s we had 80,000 General Motors jobs in Flint. I think today there's something like 5,000 GM jobs that are left. So when I made Roger and Me, 30,000 of those 80,000 jobs had been eliminated. There were still 50,000 there working, but I could see that the city and the area was going to fall apart. And so I made this movie to warn people about what was going to happen. And unfortunately, the powers that be really attacked me and really came out against me in the film. The Flint Journal, the local politicians, the Chamber of Commerce, all said that I'd done this bad thing to Flint by exposing what was going on. But I was just like the doctor who tells you that you have cancer, and you don't blame the doctor for telling you that you've got cancer. But there was a lot of hostility toward me for doing this, which so much time was lost. If people had just listened to me in 1989 when I made that film and started getting on the track to save the town, to bring other jobs, to diversify the economy, maybe we wouldn't be in the shape that we're in Flint right now. But it didn't happen. So actually I feel instead of saving Flint, I think it just it made some people just dig their heels in. People just couldn't believe General Motors would ever leave. How could that happen, right?
What happened was the leaders, people in power, the elite or whatever, attacked you because they wanted everything status quo. It didn't hurt them, but the regular Flint person, to them that gave them hope.
I know that. I know, and the people that I heard from in terms of working class people, African Americans, I know that they really were grateful and thankful that I had made this movie. And I tried for the years after that. I spent a lot of time in Flint. I helped a lot of organizations. I gave away a ton of money to different groups, from the battered women's shelter to, I hand out 10,000 free turkeys at Thanksgiving or Christmas. And but the hatred from those who were in charge was pretty intense. And after a certain point, I just couldn't live there. I couldn't just deal with it. Of just being attacked every day, every week, in the Flint Journal or on TV or whatever. And I'm just one person, so I left. And now I do whatever I can when people call for help. They're trying to reopen the Capitol Theater downtown Flint, so I'm giving them some consultation, some advice, some help with that, because I'd love to see the Capitol Theater reopened, and I think that may happen sometime this year. So I continue to do things like that. I live up in Traverse City now, I work on helping the people up there and the issues up there. But I mean, I'll always be from Flint, and I care very deeply about what's happening there. I've said that Flint doesn't need an emergency manager. The emergency was 30 years ago. In Flint, we need jobs ambassadors. Right. We're going to go around the world and find jobs and bring jobs to Flint. We need something really proactive like that, not something that's going to punish Flint.
So now more so than before, you're helping people on an individual basis. which is great, because they wouldn't listen to you. But nobody's coming up with anything. Nobody's, if they even care, to change things. What would your suggestion be, or since nothing's working, what would your suggestion be for Flint to come around, besides bringing in companies? I mean, I'm like how do we as a normal citizen help with that?
Well, I have two answers for that. One, the positive answer is if I were the mayor of Flint, first of all, I would try to merge all the communities in Genesee County to be one, metropolitan area, so that everybody can work together. So it's not just the poverty in Flint that can nobody can seem to climb out of that poverty. But if everybody was in the same boat, if Flushing and Clio and Swartz Creek and was in the same boat with people from Beecher. By the way, congratulations on the state championship. I think then that everybody would take a little more care and concern for everybody else instead of just saying, "Oh, that's their problem in Flint. It's a good thing I don't live there." I would create these positions called jobs ambassadors. I would go and search the world and to bring real jobs to Flint that pay real wages, middle class wages. And I would try to get everybody together and say, we're going to have to pull ourselves out of this too, because nobody really gives a rat's ass about us here in Flint. And so what can we do? What can we create here? What kind of urban thing can we do? What can we do with alternative energy? What can we do with urban farming? What can we create here where we help each other? Take a real pioneer approach to us. Essentially, the attitudes of my great-great-grandparents who came to that area, they didn't have anything, and they created a society there out of nothing, really. So the negative answer, the depressing and pessimistic answer is that there is no hope, that it's too late, that this should have been done 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and instead it wasn't. And people just kept letting it slip and slip and slip away to the point where I don't know now how to pull the city out of the situation that it's in, because the city has been economically killed. So how do we resurrect the body at this point? That's really what it feels like it's going to take, a literal resurrection for Flint to be a decent place to live.
Who's the contact person too that would be able to merge all those areas into one collective voice? Flushing, Flint.
Well, I think that the mayors of all the different cities in Genesee County would get together, and they would propose changing the boundaries so that Flint would be essentially one large city, which would encompass most of Genesee County. And they probably have to go to the state of Michigan to change the legal boundaries of these areas. But all I'm saying is if people in Davison suddenly felt like, or suddenly knew that they actually lived in Flint, then they're going to be a lot more involved in taking care of the problem, and as opposed to just leaving it to those who are poor and helpless and living with a lot of crime and everything else in the inner city of Flint.
Is it even feasible? Are those other people, those other counties, are they even going to want to be associated with Flint at this point?
No, they're not going to want. They're not going to want to do that. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying, if I were mayor, I would, with a moral argument, I would try to convince them that we have to do this for all of us. Because in the end, if Flint falls, Davison and Grand Blanc and the others don't stand at that point. They're going to fall too. So to let Flint just die is a huge mistake for the other towns in Genesee County.
Right. Okay, thank you for all your answers.
Thank you. Thank you for what you said.
Hello, my name is Kevin. Kevin Wynn. I'm from the great state of Alabama. Roll Tide. Question I have is, I guess a couple of comments.
We gave you one of our best football players. You know.
Like I was saying, a couple of. You mentioned, you said people today are less hateful and less afraid. So if they are less hateful, less afraid, I guess the last comment you was making to the young lady, you said that you spoke about merging all the surrounding areas together, and then you stated that people really wouldn't want that. I guess how, if they're less afraid and less hateful, why would they not want it?
What I said was that I think the younger generation is less afraid and less hateful. So people your age, unfortunately, don't hold the power in Genesee County. It's still held by people in my generation and my parents' generation. And this idea that I just expressed would be the last thing that many of them would want to do. But I've got to believe that a lot of you in the classroom right now might think it might be a good idea that we all pull together, whether we live in Davison or Flint, that we're all in the same boat and we're going to sink or swim together. And I don't know, what do you think, Kevin? I mean, do you think that younger people, the younger generation, is less hateful than the older generation?
I think back when you were coming up, I think it was, you guys were able to, can't say you guys, it was more, you were able to go out and kind of be racist in public. And the powers that be kind of allowed it to happen. So today I think racism it still exists. I think it probably not to that degree, but I think it's more it's more internal. So, and you can tell with the economic system, the way things are shaped that way. So I think it's still going on. And the reason why I think that is you can look at Flint, look at the surrounding areas. Even with why would, when black people move out, try to get out of Flint to go to the surrounding areas, white people move further away. So now the word here in the area is Fenton is now the new Grand Blanc, because more black people are moving out to Grand Blanc. And if you ride around, you see more houses for sale. Now we know the economy and stuff is messed up, but they're moving out. Even with the schools in the last couple of years in Grand Blanc, more black people are going out there and more white people are moving out towards the Fenton area. So how do you stop that?
Oh boy! Well, you can't stop it. You physically can't stop it. I guess I'm hoping that when you guys are of an age to buy a house or whatever, that you won't do that. That you won't run. I mean, so that's all I can hang on to right now is that hope. But I know what you mean about the subtle racism, the stuff that isn't said out loud. But it's you know that, like, when you yourself, when you go into a store in the Genesee Valley Mall, you're looked at differently by the security, by the different people in there, than a white kid who has come into the store. So it's not spoken out loud, but it's in people's heads, and it affects their behavior. So I don't know. Wouldn't it be great if Flint and Genesee County could really be a shining example for the rest of the country of how blacks and whites decided to work together to better everybody's well-being? Yeah.
And I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna punch out. I was riding through the city of Flint probably about 3 weeks ago with a white minister in the surrounding area, and we was riding through the city, and the way they look at Flint is almost like a missionary project, like sending people overseas to Africa. Seriously, and he could not believe what he was seeing. The boarded up houses, but they only stay 10 miles, right outside the area. And then what was really, I guess, heartbreaking for me is when we try to move out of the area and go to the good schools, to the good neighborhoods, white people leave, and we kind of, eventually over, as time goes, you kind of got the same situation, because when they leave, the tax base leaves, everything goes to schools, everything, jobs. So that's all I got. Roll Tide.
All right.
We got 2 more questions. You got time for 2 more questions?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Fantastic.
Hi,
Yeah.
my name is Leslie Lynn. I'm from Flint, Michigan. My question is, when Jennifer Granholm was the governor of Michigan, she put in different statutes. It's like if you graduate from college here in Michigan and you stay in Michigan and create a business, you get certain business taxes. And she also had a program in place called No Worker Left Behind, which helped the individuals who was not eligible for financial aid to attend college and get them a 2-year degree. But when the new governor come along, he cuts all of these programs and make it hard, but it increases the spending in the Department of Corrections. But, stop the people out here that want to do better and their life stagnating. So these individuals now are seeking grants and tuition fees to get in college. What suggestion would you have, and what route would you suggest they take?
Well, first of all, I would suggest getting rid of the Republican governor. I think that this guy is really bad news. I'm really, really sorry that he was elected. But the Democrats, I don't think, really ran a very good race against him. So at this point, because the state legislature and the governor's chair is occupied by people who do not share that viewpoint that you expressed, that we should help people who are being left behind, that there's really not much you can do. If you try to get a loan from a bank these days, it's almost impossible. If you want to start a business, it really makes me think of how, the next inventor, the next person that's got the great idea, how would they ever function these days? How would they ever be able to start a business with the next great idea? Because the system isn't set up to help them anymore. And so I don't have a hopeful answer for you. I think that you and others are going to have to politically organize and demand that things change. And that's what's gonna alter things.
Okay, thanks a lot.
All right, now thank you. I'm sorry I don't have a more hopeful answer.
Hi, my name is Janelle Jarrett. I have a question, but I have a couple statements also. Being a resident of Flint all of my life and having friends, family, and others that have been born and raised in Flint, and then they moved from Flint, and it seems like soon as they move to that different place, out of town, out of state, they look back at Flint and have this negative image of Flint. Oh, I'm glad I don't live there. My family is still stuck in that dump, and they have all these negative things to say about Flint. And I was wondering, what is your mind? What do you think? Why do you think that once they left Flint and go to this other surrounding area, wherever they may be, why they have this concept of Flint like it's a dump now, when in actuality, I look at, okay, I know GM was here and it moved, but a person's mind frame it determines on where you are and where you're going to go. Ultimately in life, it's not it's your mind frame. And also, they look at Flint as being such a dump, but if I'm not mistaken, just in like Holland, Michigan, or close to Detroit, they don't even have street lights, because the city repoed their street lights because they weren't paying their, so why is Flint looked at such a bad area when there's other places around that don't even have street lights?
Well, Flint is on its way to having no street lights. That could happen this year. The city is broke, and I think people that leave, when you say people that leave Flint, are you talking about African Americans or white?
I'm talking about, and then they'll look down on Flint, but then soon as something good happens, or like the championship, oh, I'm from Flint. Well, don't represent Flint when something happens good, but you're not representing it regardless. I just think that's.
Yeah, I don't understand that attitude. I'm so proud of the fact that I grew up in the Flint area, and I've always been very proud to say that I'm from Flint. I'm glad that I was raised in the Flint area. I think it really helped shape who I became, and I'm eternally grateful for that. People see it as a dump now. When you say they see it as a dump, again, I think people are afraid. I mean, you know the statistics. I mean, Flint is always at the top of the most violent cities in America.
But it's been that way. It just didn't start there. It's been that way for a long time. If you check statistics, it just didn't get horrible here. It's been horrible here.
It's been that way, yes, since the early 80s.
Yes,
that's right.
It has.
That's correct. That's correct. And the political and business establishment in Flint really messed up in the 80s, in the 90s, and didn't do the job they should have done to save Flint. So now, I think Flint is going to have to be saved by the people who are there, and I think the man mentioned before you about the minister who sees Flint as like a missionary. I don't think that's so far from the truth. In fact, I've often felt that Flint should apply for foreign aid to France or Germany or Japan. And ask them to please come to help out the people in Flint. So I'm sorry that people have that attitude. I don't know. When you leave Flint, I don't know how you can leave behind that place that you were raised in, or forget people. So I mean that's why I'm down there climbing through the Capitol Theater. A few weeks ago, because I care about Flint and I want the Capitol Theater to be reopened. But I'm only one person. I mean, everybody's got to do their part, and that's why I would try to figure out a way to engage people in the suburbs to do their part, to realize that saving Flint is important to them too. But I'm sure right now people just are so afraid of Flint. When you drive through the east side of Flint now, where my dad grew up, it's look, poverty is a killer, and unless we address that issue, all the other issues we're not going to be able to deal with them until people have jobs and have an income, and that should be the only thing we're talking about. What are we doing to create jobs in Flint? What are we doing so that people have an income? And I don't hear a lot of that. I hear a lot of talk, but I don't see a lot of action. People are going to have to politically organize. You're going to have to rise up. You're really going to have to rise up if you want to save Flint, and demand better, and then demand better of each other, and learn to treat each other well, and to not hurt each other just because you might be hurting yourself or hurting economically. It doesn't get better when you then hurt somebody else.
All right, that's all I have to say.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, cool. All right, I got one myself.
All right.
As the professor of family and society, trying to analyze variables that produce outcomes and correlations, life chances, and upward mobility. You come from a very similar background to about 35 students that I have right here. And I look at you as successful, and a lot of America does, be it for your products or for your income or for maybe just the impact or even your happiness. Some people will say are success because you appear to be content with what you've done. Now, I'm looking at what is the variable that differentiates you from these 35 people. I'm trying to inspire them to be just as impactful in whatever their chosen careers are. And as a sociologist, what do you think is the variable, or if there's anything you could tell these students, because the life chances and the upward mobility should be the same. I'm looking at all the variables the same. A lot of Irish Catholics in the student group, a lot of some people from Davison, they all go to U of M Flint. You went to U of M Flint. So what do you think's the breaking point, or what can you tell these students?
Wow. Right. I grew up in a factory family. My parents did not have college degrees. I do not have a college degree. So how did I end up doing what I did, getting to make the movies that I've made, having the life I have now? I think from a very early age, I just wouldn't take any shit. And when I saw something happening that was wrong, I stood up for them. When I saw bullies in the schoolyard beating on other kids, I would step in front of them and not let them beat on them anymore. That's just the way I was wired, I think, by my parents. So by the time I was 18 years old, and I didn't like the school system in Davison, so what did I do? I decided to run for the Board of Education, and I got elected to the school board when I was 18 years old. So I started at a very early age saying, I'm not going to wait for the adults to fix this, because I don't think they're going to fix it. I'm going to have to fix it. My friends are going to have to fix it. We're going to have to make this better. So I ran for public office, because I wanted to make things better. And then when I made Roger and Me, I was on unemployment. I used to go out and stand in line there on the corner of, I think it was Pearson and Martin Luther King, to pick up my unemployment check. So when I made my first movie, I was essentially on welfare, and but I never really thought about it that way. I just thought, I have creativity in me. I think I have some kind of talent, and I'm going to do something with it. And I'm not going to let anybody here say that I can't do it because I don't have a college degree or I don't have any money. I have a beater car. I didn't let any of that bother me, and I just went and did it. So my advice to students there is that don't expect somebody that is going to do it for you. You're going to have to do it. You're going to have to politically organize, and you're going to have to find your way. But you can't do it alone. You have to do it with other people. And I think I think it was really. When you say the variable, you're right. I have the same tools and the same background that many people have sitting in that classroom. And yet I've been able to have this life. So I think that I just decided that I had it within me to stand up, rise up, don't take any shit, and organize others. There's more of us than there are of them. People in charge, people in power. And if we ever understood that, if we ever got it together, they'd be in deep trouble.
All right, very good advice. Now, the class is getting over. I'm going to leave the lights on. I'm going to leave the computer up. So I'm hoping all the students that were a little bit too embarrassed to talk during the class will come up and walk by the computer and maybe give you a thanks. I can only speak on behalf of myself. So I will say thank you again, Mr. Moore, in a very unconventional way to reach out to you over the Twitter. And I'm telling all the students to go buy the book. I'm going to force it get into the bookstore at U of M Flint. But on behalf of myself and hopefully the rest of the class, I'd just like to give you a round of applause and thank you for coming to Flint.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And now I'm going to leave the computer up, and if you want to give them some parting shots or words, feel free right here. Thanks, Mr. Moore.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Mr. Moore. Teresa Willard again. I just wanted to let you know that I am, I don't know if you've looked it up or did any research, but I'm part of the Bridge Church on the west side of Flint. We have gotten international coverage because we have a tattoo shop in our church, and we are trying to get the unchurched in the church and to help hold the community a little bit better. Anybody's welcome, that sort of thing. I would suggest just look it up. And the pastor of our church, he lives in Beecher. We're trying to make a difference, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying. Thank you for what you're doing.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Michael Moore, for stopping and talking to our class.
Thank you.